Good day everyone, my name is Lavan Pirbata, and for today's video, we are going to discuss the topic Years of Crisis on 1919 up to 1939. So here are the main ideas in this topic. In terms of science and technology, in the 1920s, new scientific ideas changed the way people look at the world. New inventions improved transportation and communication. In terms of economics, the collapse of the American economy in 1929 triggered a depression that threatened the economic and political systems of countries throughout the world. While in the power and authority, in the 1930s, several countries, including Japan, Germany, and Italy, adopted aggressive militaristic policies. So as you can see from the picture, here are the map of the expansion in Europe during 1931 up to 1939. In 20 years of crisis, there are four sections composed of four certain issues exist during that time of crisis. First section is post-war uncertainty. Section 2 is a worldwide depression. Section 3 is fascism rises in Europe. And for the last section, we have aggressors invade nations. So why do we need to study it right now? And why it matters now? It is because post-war trends in physics, psychiatry, art, literature, communication, music, and transportation still affect our lives. So for the section 1, we have post-war uncertainty. So when we say uncertainty, in Filipino, it is walang katiyakan. So after the World War I, the society there or during that time is uncertainty. So the post-war period is one of loss and uncertainty, but also one of invention, creativity, and new ideas. So habang ito is uncertainty, sa kabilang banda, ito din is may mga good inventions and creativity and new ideas occur din naman. So in setting the stage, the horrors of World War I shattered the Enlightenment belief that progress would continue and reason would prevail. In the post-war period, people began questioning traditional beliefs. Some found answers in new scientific developments, which challenged the way people look at the world. Many enjoyed the convenience of technological improvements in transportation and communication. So as the society became more open, women demanded more rights, and young people adopted new values. Meanwhile, unconventional styles and ideas in literature, philosophy, and music during the uncertain times. So during the post-war period, there are new revolution in science, wherein the ideas of Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud had an enormous impact on the 20th century. So these thinkers were part of the scientific revolution as important as that brought about centuries earlier by Copernicus and Galileo. So the impact of Einstein's theory of relativity. Albert Einstein offered radically new ideas in field of physics. His theory of relativity is idea that space and time are not constant. New ideas make world seem more uncertain than before. So Albert Einstein is a German-born physicist. Scientists had found that light travels at exactly the same speed no matter what direction it moves in relation to Earth. So in 1905, Einstein theorized that while the speed of light is constant, other things that seem constant, such as space and time, are not. Space and time can change when measured relative to an object moving near the speed of light. So since relative motion is the key to Einstein's idea, it is called the theory of relativity. So this idea of Einstein had an implication not only for science, but also for how people viewed the world. So another revolution in science exists during post-war period is the influence of Freudian psychology. So Sigmund Freud is an Austrian doctor with new ideas about the mind. He claims that human behavior is not based on reason. So Sigmund Freud is an Austrian physician. From his experience, he constructed a theory about the human mind. He believed that much of human behavior is irrational or beyond reason. He called the irrational part of the mind the unconscious. In the unconscious, a number of drives existed, especially pleasure-seeking drives, of which the conscious mind was unaware. Freud's ideas was weakened faith in reason, even so by the 1920s. Freud's theories had developed widespread influence. So let us now move on to the literature during 1920s. Impact of the war. Suffering caused by World War I leads many to doubt all beliefs. Writers reflect society's concern. Novels of Kafka reflect uneasiness of post-war years. Novels of Joyce reflects Freud's ideas about the mind. So during that time, the brutality of World War I caused philosophers and writers to question accepted ideas about reason and progress. Disillusioned by the war, many people also feared the future and expressed their anxieties by creating disturbing visions of the present and the future. The horror of war made a deep impression on many writers. Franz Kafka wrote eerie novels such as The Trial in 1925 and The Castle during 1926. His books feature people caught in threatening situations they can neither understand nor escape. The book struck a chord among readers in uneasy post-war years. James Joyce gained widespread attention with his stream of consciousness novel Ulysses during 1922. This book focuses on a single day in the lives of three people in Dublin, Ireland. And also, during that time, thinkers react to uncertainties. Philosophy of existentialism, no universe meaning to life, that's mean. Friedrich Nietzsche urged return to ancient heroic values. So in the search of meaning, in an uncertain world, some thinkers turn to the philosophers known as existentialism, which is each person creates his or her own meaning in life through choices made and action taken. Values of pride, assertiveness, and strength. Through his idea, it attracted attention in 20th century and had a great impact on politics in Italy and Germany during 1920s and 1930s. So during post-war period, hindi lang literature and revolution in science ang nangyari. So meron din tayong revolution in the arts during that time. So artists rebel against tradition. So dito na pumapasok yung mga rebels from the artists. Artists want to depict inner world of mind. Cubism transformed natural shapes into geometric forms. Surrealism. So when we say surrealism, it is an art movement that links dreams with real life. And also the composers trying new styles. So nagkaroon ng invention. Composers move away from traditional styles. Jazz. So when we say jazz, it is a musical style that captures age new freedom. So bagaman marami ng directions and bagong instructions in painting and music began in the pre-war period, so nag-evolve pa rin ito after the war, and that is during the post-war period. So they wanted to depict the inner world of emotion and imagination rather than the surrealistic representative of objects. So si George Braque of France and Pablo Picasso of Spain founded Cubism in 1907. Objects were broken down into different parts with sharp angles and edges. Often several views were depicted at the same time. So it was inspired by Freud's ideas. The term surreal means beyond or reality. Surrealists try to call on the unconscious part of their mind. So in his ballet masterpiece, The Rite of Spring, the Russian composer Igor Stravinsky used irregular rhythms and dissonances or harsh combination of sound. The Austrian composer Arnold Schoenberg rejected traditional harmonies and musical scales. After the evolution of the arts, meron ding challenges. Society challenges convention. So World War I has disrupted traditional social patterns. New ideas of ways of life led to a new kind of individual freedom during the 1920s. Young people especially were willing to break with the past and experiment with modern values. So during that time, let us know what are the roles of women that has been changed during that time. So women take on new roles during World War I. These works helps many women with the right to vote. In 1920s, women adopt freer clothing and also hairstyles. Some women seek new careers. So, women that time wore shorter, looser garments and had their own hair bob cut or short hair. They also wore makeup, drove cars and dark and smoked in public. As women sought new careers, the number of women in medicine, education, journalism, and other profession increases. So napakalaki ng pagbabago sa role ng pagiging isang babae during post-war period. So from the last part of the post-war uncertainty, we have the technological advances improved life. So let us know how and when it is improved during that time. So the automobile altered society. Cars improved after that war. Cars become less expensive and it increased auto use changed people's lives. Airplanes transformed travel. Charles Lander first to fly alone across Atlantic. And radio and movies dominate popular entertainment. So in 1920s, commercial radio stations spread across US and the motion pictures major become industry art form. So during World War I, scientists developed new drugs and medical treatments that helped millions of people in the post-war years. So the war's technological advances were put to use to improve transportation and communication after the war. Electric starters, air-filled tires, and more powerful engines were improved. Before, they produced 34,000 in 1913, but now they can produce 511,000 a year. So more people traveled for pleasure. In Europe and in the US, new businesses opened to serve the mobile tourists. The auto also affected where also live and worked. People moved suburbs and commuted to work in the cities. So let us now move on to the section 2, which entitled A Worldwide Depression. So an economic depression in the United States spreads throughout the world and lasts for a decade. So why it matters now? Many social and economic programs introduced worldwide to combat the Great Depression are still operating. So during the post-war Europe, the unstable new democracy. Full of kingdoms, empires create new democracies in Europe. From 1914 to 1918, Europe's last absolute rulers had been overthrown. The first of the new government was formed in Russia in 1917. The provisional government, as it was called, hoped to establish constitutional and democratic rule. However, within months it had fallen to a communist dictatorship. Even so, for the first time, most European nations had democratic government. So, many citizens of new democracies had little experiences with representative government. For generations, kings and emperors had ruled Germany and the new nation from Austria-Hungary. Even in France and Italy, whose parliaments had existed before World War I, the large number of political parties made effective government difficult. So in these countries, it was almost impossible for one party to win enough support to govern effectively. When no single party won a majority, a coalition government, or temporary alliance of several parties was needed to form a parliamentary majority. So because the parties disagreed on so many policies, coalitions seldom lasted very long. Frequent changes in government made it hard for democratic countries to develop strong leadership and move toward long-term goals. The weaknesses of coalition government become a major problem in times of crisis. Voters in several countries were then willing to sacrifice democratic governance for strong and authoritarian leadership. And then, frequent changes in government made it hard to democratic countries to develop strong leadership and move toward long-term goals. The weaknesses of a coalition government become a major problem in times of crisis. Voters in several countries were then willing to sacrifice democratic for strong and authoritarian leadership. So what happened to the Weimar Republic? Democracy in Germany. Weimar Republic is Germany's democratic government formed in 1919, and the government has serious weaknesses. And inflation causes crisis in Germany. The value of German currency falls dramatically, and attempts to at economic stability, American loans helped revive German economy. So the Weimar Republic had serious weaknesses from the start. First, Germany lacked a strong democratic tradition. Furthermore, post-war Germany had several major political parties and many minor ones. Worst of all, millions of Germans blamed the Weimar government, not their wartime leaders, for the country's defeat and post-war humiliation caused by the Versailles Treaty. So Germany also faced enormous economic problems that had begun during that war. To pay the expenses of the war, the Germans had simply printed money. So after the Germans defeat, this paper money steadily lost its value. As a result, the value of the mark, as Germany's currency was called, fell sharply. Severe inflation set in. Germans needed more and more money to buy even the most basic goods. For example, the best example is in Berlin, a loaf of bread cost less than mark in 1918, so more than 160 marks in 1922, and some 200 billion marks by late 1923. So people took wheelbarrows full of money to buy food, and as a result, many Germans questioned the value of their new democratic government. While in attempts at economic stability, Germany recovered from the 1923 inflations thanks largely to the work of an international committee. The Dawes Plan provided for a $200 million loan from American banks to stabilize German currency and strengthen its economy. The plan also set a more realistic schedule for Germany's reparations payments. Put into effect in 1924, the Dawes Plan helped slow inflation. So as the German economy began to recover, it attracted more loans and investment from the United States. So by the 1929, German factories were producing as much as they had before the war. So in efforts at a lasting peace, Germany and France signed treaty pledging no more war. And many nations signed a similar agreement, the Kellogg-Briand Pact. As prosperity returned, Germany's foreign minister Gustav Stresemann and France's foreign minister Aristide Briand tried to improve relations between their countries. So in 1825, the two ministers met in Locarno, Switzerland, with officials from Belgium, Italy, and Britain. They signed a treaty promising that France and Germany would never again make war against each other. So in 1828, the hopes raised by the spirit of Locarno led to Kellogg-Briand Peace Pact. Frank Kellogg, the U.S. Secretary of the State, arranged this agreement with Franz Briand. Almost every country in the world, including the Soviet Union, signed. They pledged to renounce war as an instrument of national policy. Unfortunately, the treaty had no means to enforce its provision. The League of Nations, the obvious choice as enforcer, had no armed force. The refusal of the United States to join the League also weakened it. Nonetheless, the peace agreements seem a good start. So let us now talk the financial collapse, a flawed US economy. Weaknesses in American economy cause serious problems. Wealth is distributed unevenly. Most people are too poor to buy goods produced. Factory owners cut back on production, lay off workers. Farmers produce more food than people can eat. Many farmers cannot repay loans and lose their lands. So in the late 1920s, American economic prosperity largely sustained the world economy. So if the US economy weakened, the whole world economic system might collapse. So in 1922, it did. Despite prosperity, several weaknesses in the US economy caused serious problems. These include uneven distribution of wealth, overproduction by business and agriculture, and the fact that many Americans were buying less. So by 1929, American factories were turning out nearly half of the world's industrial goods. The rising productivity led to enormous profits. However, this new wealth was not evenly distributed. The richest 5% of the population received 33% of all personal income in 1929. Yet, 60% of all American families earn less than $200 a year, or $2,000 a year rather. Thus, most families were too poor to buy goods being produced, unable to sell their goods. Store owners eventually cut back their order from factories. Factories in turn reduced production and laid off workers, so nagbabawas na ng mga tauhan. A downward economic spiral began. As more workers lost their jobs, families bought even fewer goods. In turn, factories made further cuts in production and laid off more workers. So during the 1920s, overproduction affected American farmers as well. Scientific farming methods and new farm machinery had dramatically increased crop yields. American farmers were producing more food. Meanwhile, they faced new competition from farmers in Australia, Latin America, and Europe. So as a result, a worldwide surplus of agricultural products drove prices and profits down. Unable to sell their crops at a profit, so many farmers could not pay off the bank loans that kept in business. Their unpaid debts weakened banks and forced some to close. The dangerous signs of overproduction by factories and firms should have warned people against gambling on the stock market, yet no one heeded the warning. So the stock market crashes, stock prices soar, many people bought stocks on credit, investors begin selling stocks which lower prices. And in October 29, 1929, stock markets collapses as price fall very low. So, pumasok na dito yung the Great Depression. Because of the economic downturn, Great Depression is a long business slump of 1930s and marked by bank failures, loss of savings, and unemployment. In the global depression, American economic problems create problems in the other countries and world trade falls sharply. And the effects of throughout the world, Germany and Austria suffer greatly, as do Asia and Latin America. So, because of that, the world confronts the crisis. Britain takes a step to improve its economy. British voters elect a coalition government, avoid political extremes, and government brings about slow, steady economic recovery. And then they preserve democracy by avoiding political extremes. So the France respond to economic crisis. Unlike Britain, France had more self-sufficient economy. In 1930, it was still heavily agricultural and less independent on foreign trade. Nevertheless, by 1935, 1 million French workers were unemployed. The economic crisis contributed to political instability. So in 1933, five coalition governments formed and fell, and many political leaders were frightened by the growth and the anti-democratic forces both in France and in other parts of Europe. So in 1936, moderate socialists and communists formed a coalition, and the Popular Front, as it was called, passed a series of reforms to help the workers. And unfortunately, price increases quickly offset wage gains and unemployment remained high. Yet, France also preserved democratic government. So that socialist government find solution, and the socialist governments in the Scandinavian countries of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway also met the challenge of economic crisis successfully. They built the recovery programs on an existing tradition of cooperative community action. In Sweden, the government sponsored massive public works projects that kept people employed and producing. So all the Scandinavian countries raised pensions for the elderly and increased unemployment insurance, subsidies for housing, and other welfare benefits. So to pay these benefits, the governments tax all citizens, democracy remained intact. Recovery in the United States in 1932. So in the first presidential election, after the Depression had begun, U.S. voters elected Franklin D. Roosevelt. His confident manner appealed to millions of Americans who felt bewildered by the Depression. So Roosevelt immediately began a program of government reform that he called the New Deal. It is a large public works project helped to provide jobs for the unemployed, and new government agencies have gave financial help to businesses and farms. Large amounts of people money were spent on welfare and relief programs. Roosevelt and his advisors believed that government spending would create jobs and start a recovery. Regulations were imposed to reform the stock market and banking system, and the New Deal did eventually reform the American economic system. Roosevelt's leadership preserved the country's faith in its democratic political system, so it also established himself as a leader of democracy in a world threatened by ruthless dictature.
From the next part, I am Elaine F. Rivado, who will assign to report Section 3 entitled Fascism Rises in Europe. So the first is in response to political turmoil and economic crisis, Italy and Germany turned to totalitarian dictators. So with this, because of the political turmoil and economic crisis, many democracies, including United States, Britain, and France, have been strong despite the economic crisis caused by the Great Depression or the law of economy. So, as the result of this, millions of people lost faith in democratic government that turned to an extreme system of government called fascism. So from the next is fascism rises in Italy. So what do you mean by fascism? So fascism is a political movement that promotes an extreme form of nationalism and militarism. So the first is new political movement. So fascism is a new political movement. So unlike communism, fascism had no clearly defined as theory or program. Therefore, it shared several ideas. Also, fascists believed that nation must struggle peaceful state were doomed to be conquered. And the next is emphasize nationalism and loyalty to authoritarian leader. So they pledge loyalty with their leader and wearing uniforms of certain colors that symbolize special salutes and held mass rallies. So the next is Mussolini takes control. So from this, we have Italians wants a leader who will take action. So because of what happened from the Italian, it takes by Benito Mussolini. The next is fascist party leader Benito Mussolini promises to rescue Italy. So Italian kings puts Mussolini in charge of government. So King Victor Emmanuel III put Mussolini to in charge of the government because King trusted Mussolini and he had faith that Mussolini have best hope for his dynasty to survive. From the next is El Duque leadership. Mussolini takes firm control in politics and economy in Italy. Mussolini also called the El Duque. So why? Because of the term Mussolini, the abolished democracy and outlawed all political parties except the fascists. Because of this, he published the government censors forced radio station and publication to broadcast only the fascist doctrines. Also, he solved economy by allying fascists with the industrialized and landowners. From the next part, we have Hitler rises to power in Germany. So when Mussolini became dictator of Italy and he became fame in the mid 1920s, Adolf Hitler was in and make an little issues in Germany. So nakilala ito, a new power. So Adolf Hitler, obscure political figure in 1920s Germany. So Adolf Hitler, little known as political leader whose early life had been marked by disappointment. So the rise of the Nazis, pumasok naman dito. So what do you mean by Nazis? It is like the term Nazism, which is German branch of fascism. The rise of Nazis at the end of the war, Hitler settled in Munich. Also, this group Nazism shared belief that Germany had to overturn the Treaty of Versailles and combat communism. This group named itself as National Socialist German Workers' Party, so or called Nazi for short. So Hitler became Nazi leader plus to seize national power. So the result of this, they failed and Hitler was arrested in prison to only 5 years. The next is Mein Kampf. Hitler books detailing beliefs or goals. When you say Mein Kampf, also known as My Struggle, so gumawa si Hitler ng isang book which is Mein Kampf or also known as My Struggle. So this book sets forth beliefs of his goals for Germany. Hitler also asserted that Germans, who him incorrectly called Aryans, were a master race, and he declared non-Aryan races such as Jews, Slavs, and Glypsians were inferior. The next is Hitler becomes the Germany needs Lebensraum or living space. So what do you mean by that? So for Aryan race, it served as the critical component of Nazi, and it is both military conquest and racial policy. So the next is German turns to Hitler when economy collapses. So after Hitler leaving prison a year 1924, most German ignored him. His anger message until the Great Depression ended until when American loans stopped. So German economy collapsed, resulting to Germans turn to Hitler for the hope and security of the firm leadership. So Hitler becomes chancellor. So with this, we have Hitler new power. So Hitler is named as chancellor. So how? In January 1933, they advised President Paul von Hindenburg to name Hitler as chancellor. This means that Hitler have legally power, and soon after by General Erich Ludendorff, who is the formerly Hitler ally, word to Hindenburg. So the next is turn Germany into totalitarian state. So how? By his power, he turned Germany into totalitarian state. He banned all political parties and had opponents arrested. The next is by the use of brutal tactics and economic enemies. So by use of Hitler brutal tactics and eliminate enemies with the power of Hitler, there have elite black and uniform called the Chptr. So are the protection squad. It was created and it is loyal for Hitler. He arrested the Chptr arrested and murdered hundreds of Hitler enemy caused by the brutal action and terror. Terror by the Gestapo or the Nazi secret police so that German shocked for what happened. So from the next is the Führer is supreme. So Hitler takes control over every aspect of German life. So because of the Hitler power, they wanted more than just an economic and political power, but he also wanted to control every aspect of German life. So also to shape public opinion and to win praise from his leadership. Hitler turned to the press, radio, literature, painting, and film into propaganda tools. So also books that did not conform to Nazi beliefs were burned in huge bonfires. Also churches forbidden to criticize the Nazi or the government. So Hitler believed that continuous struggle brought victory to the strong. So from the next is Hitler makes war on the Jews or the mga Hudyo. So Nazis describe Jews as a right and promote violence against them. The hatred of Jews was a key part of Nazi ideology. Because Jews were less than 1% of population, the Nazis used them as scapegoats that led the anti-Semitism from Jews. Despising Jews, most of the riot and violence against Jews mounted. That cause of the riot on November 13, 1938, Nazi mobs attacked Jews in their homes and on distress and destroyed thousands of Jewish-owned buildings. That caused of the signal or the start to eliminating Jews from the German life. From the next is Hitler's other countries fall to dictators. The first is the started of world to be divided. So world is divided. Most of the Eastern Europe falls to dictator. So including the Hungary in 1919, a brief of communist regime. So military forces, including a wealthy and landowners, joined to the make Admiral Miklos Horthy. So it is a first European post-war dictator. So in Poland, seized power in 1926 in Yugoslavia, Albania, Bulgarian, and Romanian kings turned to strongman rule. Only one democracy, Czechoslovakia, remained in Eastern Europe. Only Czechoslovakia returned to the democratic government. World split comes democratic and totalitarian. From the next part, section 4, aggressors invade nation. So first, as and Italy and Japan conquer other countries, the rest of the world does nothing to stop them. So by the mid-1930s, Germany and Italy seemed bent on military conquest. The major democracies, Britain, France, and the United States, were distracted by economic problems at home and longed to remain at peace. With the world moving toward war, many nations pinned their hopes for peace on the League of Nations. As fascism spread in Europe, however, a powerful nation in Asia moved toward a similar system. The next is Japan's Sikh Empire. So during the 1920s, the Japanese government became more democratic. In 1922, Japan signed an international treaty agreeing to respect China's border. In 1928, it signed to collect Brand Pact renouncing war. Japan's parliamentary system had several weaknesses. However, its constitution put strict limits on the power of the prime minister and the cabinet. So the next is military state control in Japan. Military leaders take control of country. So when the Great Depression struck in 1929, many Japanese blamed the government. Military leaders gained support and soon won control of the country. Unlike the fascists in Europe, the militarists did not try to establish a new system of government. They wanted to restore traditional control of the government up to the military. Instead of the forceful leader like Mussolini or Hitler, the militarists made the emperor the symbol of the state power. So, wants to solve economic problems through foreign expansion. So they wanted to solve the country economic problems through foreign expansion. So they planned a Pacific empire that included a conquered China. The empire would provide Japan with raw materials and markets for its goods. It would also give Japan room for its rising population. So the next is Japan invades Manchuria. So Japan has invested in Manchuria Chines. So Japanese business had invested heavily in Japan. So Northeast Province Manchuria, it was an area rich in iron and coal. So in 1931, the Japanese army seized Manchuria despite objection from the Japanese parliament. The army then set up a puppet government. Japanese engineers and technicians began arriving in large numbers to build mines and the in 1931, Japanese army seized Manchuria. Japanese attack on Manchuria was the first direct challenge of the League of Nations. In the early 1930s, the League members included all major democracies except the United Nations. The League also included the three countries that pose and greatest threat to peace: Germany, Japan, and Italy. League of Nations protest action. Japan withdraws from League. So when Japan seized Manchuria, many League members vigorously protested. Japan ignored the protest and withdrew from the League in 1933. Japan invades China. So in 1937, Japan launches war on China. So 4 years later, a border incident touched a full-scale war between China and Japan. So Japanese forces swept into northern China despite having a million soldiers. So China army leads by Jing Yishi was no match with the better equipped and trained Japanese. So European aggressors on the march. So the League failures to stop the Japanese encouraged European fascists to plan aggression of their own. The Italian leader Mussolini dreamed of building a colonial empire in America like those of Britain and France. So next is Mussolini attacks Ethiopia. So in 1935, Mussolini attacks Ethiopia. League of Nations does not stop aggression. So the Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie urgently appealed to the League for help. So although the League condemned the attack, its members did nothing. Britain continued to let Italian troops and supply pass through the British-controlled Suez Canal on their way to Ethiopia by giving it to Mussolini in Africa. Britain and France hoped to keep peace in Europe. So the next part is Hitler defies Versailles Treaty. So with this, in 1935, Hitler begins rebuilding German army. So with that, Hitler had long pledged to undo the Versailles Treaty. So among its provisions, the treaty limited the size of Germany army. In March 1935, the Fardier announced that Germany would not obey this restriction, so the League issued only for the mid-condemnation. So in 1936, Germany occupies Greenland. So Britain's argues appeasement, a policy of giving into aggression. So Germany, Italy, Japan, the Axis power from the alliance. So on March 7, 1936, German troops moved into Greenland. Stand the French were unwilling to risk war. The British are appeasement giving in to an aggressors to keep peace. So Hitler's growing strength convinced Mussolini that he should seek an alliance with Germany. In October 1936, the two dictators reached an agreement that became known as the Rome-Berlin Axis. A month later, Germany also made an agreement with Japan. Germany, Italy, and Japan came to be called the Axis power. So, from the next part is civil war erupts in Spain. So in 1931, a republic is declared in Spain. So how Hitler and Mussolini against that says the will of the democracies in Europe in the Spanish Civil War. So Spain had been a monarchy until 1931. When a republic was declared, the government run by liberals and socialists held office and amid many crises. So in 1936, General Francisco Franco leads rebellion. So in July 1936, many leaders favoring a fascist-style government joined General Francisco Franco in the revolt that began a civil war that dragged on the 3 years. So the next is Hitler and Mussolini holds Franco and his fascists. In 1939, Franco wins Spanish Civil War. So Franco becomes Spain's fascist dictator. So Hitler and Mussolini sent troops, tanks, and airplanes to help Franco forces. So which were called the nationalists. So the armed forces of the Republican, as supporters of Spain elected government were known received little help from abroad. So the Western democracies remained neutral. Only the Soviet Union sent equipment and advisors. An international brigade of volunteers fought on the Republican side. Early in 1939, Republican resistance collapsed. Franco became Spain's fascist dictator. So the result is, from the last part, is Franco becomes Spain fascist dictator naman. So the next is democratic nation try to preserve peace. So United States follow an isolationist party. So United States follow an isolationist policy. Many Americans supported isolationism, and that believe that political ties to other countries should be avoided. Isolationalists agree that entry into World War I had been a costly error. Beginning in 1935, Congress passed the new Na- Neutrality Act. So this law banned loans and the sale of arms to nations at war. So what do you mean by isolationalism? So it is an abundance of political ties with other countries. So in 1935, Congress passed Neutrality Act. Neutrality Act. So France repeatedly made concessions, hoping to keep peace, but nations were dealing with serious economic problems as the result of the Great Depression. So, addition, the horrors of World War I had created a deep desire to avoid war. So, the next is German Reich expand. So, Hitler planned to expand the Third Reich German Empire. On November 5, 1937, Hitler announced to his advisor his plan to absorb Austria and Czechoslovakia into the Third Reich, or a German Empire. The Treaty of Versailles prohibited Axis ANSUS or an union between Austria and Germany. However, many Austrians supported unity with Germany. So in 1938, Hitler annexes Austria. So in March 1938, Hitler sent his army in Austria and annexed it. France and Britain ignored their pledge to protest Austrian independence. The next is Hitler demands a Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. So Hitler next turned to Czechoslovakia. About 3 million German-speaking people lived in the western border regions of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland. So Czech refused ask France for help. So the Anschluss raised pro-Nazi feelings among Sudeten Germans. So in September 1938, Hitler demanded that the Sudetenland be given to Germany. The Czech refused and asked France for the help. From the next, we have Britain and France again choose appeasement. So leader met and Munich conference to settle such crisis. Britain and France agreed to let Hitler take Sudetenland. But in 1939, Hitler take rest of the Czechoslovakia. So Mussolini takes Albania, Hitler's demand part of the Poland. So the next is Nazis and Soviets sign non-aggression pact. So in 1939, Stalin and Hitler pledged never to attack one another. So in this pledge, the two dictators reached an agreement once bitter enemies. So fascist Germany and communist Russia now publicly pledged never to attack one another. On August 23, 1939, their leaders signed on a non-aggression pact. As the Axis power moved unchecked at the end of the decade, war appeared unbeatable. So that's all, and thank you for listening.